October hit me with a plethora of movies after having a slight dry spell. And out of all the movies I've seen and the ones I've managed to squeeze into my time and having to like make video after video, this one so far, like there have been good ones, there have been okay ones, but this one made me feel something that I can't even describe how I feel. A loss for words. I have been sitting here for a couple hours after this movie trying to find a way to describe how I felt about this movie and the messages that this movie had. There were so many lessons this movie gave me that it's kind of a lot, and it wraps up well together, but also like it's everywhere, and let's just try to dissect it. First and foremost, I enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed this movie very much. So as soon as this movie starts, it just throws you in there. I felt like immediately I was thrown into the world of this movie, and there's so much mystery around the world, but also like the best way I describe when I first started watching the movie, I feel like I was watching a short film, because like I feel short films have to kind of hurry up and like give you to the plot, but it was a short film that just kept going and it never ended, and I didn't want it to end, and that was like a good part of it, was just this felt like a short film that just kept going, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Based off a book, never even heard of the book, but if you watch the trailer, it kind of tells you the whole story, but there's so much more even under that layer. But the base of it is there's a robot that washes up on this island, and it's trying to find its purpose. It's a robot, it has objectives, it has a code that it has to follow. It's a robot that will do tasks for people, right? That's its whole objective. But it's on this island filled with animals, so the animals don't understand it. It doesn't understand the animals. Animals don't necessarily have tasks or objectives. So it goes around and tries to find a way to communicate with the animals. And that was the coolest part, was once it figures out I can't really communicate with these animals, the robot locks himself down. It goes into a learning mode where it spends like so many amount of days just learning the language of the animals. And in real time, you watch this robot learn how to speak to these animals. And once it does, the animals don't want anything to do with this robot. They're like, you're different, you're weird, get away from me. And that was like one of the lesson number one of this movie, was how you could be treated differently because you look different. Maybe you're from somewhere else, you're foreign, you're odd looking, you speak differently, you have different mannerisms, and they pretty much was like, no, this thing is a monster, it's gonna kill us. Okay, wow, like they're not even giving this thing a chance. But also this robot doesn't like know like the customs of animals, and like all these animals have these instincts that they're following because they're animals. Like it's like eat or be eaten. And that was another part of this movie that I like. For the most part, it's a family movie, right? And for them, kids are going to be in this movie, right? And I've said this before, kids movies, you have to find a way to give messages so they can digest them easily. But there were parts of this movie that I was like, oh, that's dark, but they did that. They did not sugarcoat the fact that these are animals and that they will eat each other. There were so many times where I saw that happen, where like an animal ate another animal, and it showed like the robot has a butterfly, and then like a bird eats the butterfly, and then like a bigger bird eats the little bird. It's just holding the head of it. There was one scene where eventually the robot learns how to talk, starts to befriend some animals, but first here's like probably like where we get the main gist of the story. So the robot in this like freak accident is being attacked by all these raccoons, and they're trying to steal parts of it, and some of it is comedic, some of it is kind of dark and a little weird. I mean, there's a bear that attacks the robot, but eventually the robot crashes onto a nest, and you see that this robot kills a bird, kills a Canadian geese, and just like destroys the eggs in the nest. And the robot doesn't necessarily comprehend the fact that this egg is broken, and it's like trying to put it back together. Then eventually it finds one egg that's alive, and it takes care of the egg, warms it up. But eventually a fox tries to steal the egg and it doesn't succeed. Eventually gets its egg back, and then that's when the egg finally hatches and imprints on the robot. The robot then is like, what do I do with this egg? I don't know. Like, it's a robot, it doesn't like necessarily know anything about any of that stuff. It's like, okay, it hatched, bye, leave me alone. But the obviously the little goose is just gonna like keep following the robot. So eventually this is where we get some more comedic parts where and a little bit dark. Eventually you see a possum, and the possum is carrying babies, and the babies are all talking and they're saying really silly stuff. And so the robot just puts it on top of the possum, and then they're like, what's this thing? And they all get scared and they play dead. And there's some comedic parts with that. Eventually the possum's like, where's your mom? And then it's like, oh, the robot, I guess it's its mom now. And then that's when the possum and the robot have a conversation, and basically the robot will only do tasks if it's told to, and at that point, the possum's like, you're a mother now. This is your task to do to take care of this baby. So the robot starts to take care of the baby. Now, this is where we get some, like, in my opinion, some symbolism. Like I said, there was a lot of messages in this movie, but I think a core one was the fact that I felt it highlighted some of the aspects of being a mother and the expectations that come with that. I don't know exactly what the people of DreamWorks were trying to do with this movie, but this is what I was thinking about when it happened, was that there are all these pressures that come with being a mother and these like struggles. And even like the possum was talking about how like, yeah, I'm winging this. I don't know. It's hard taking care of all these kids. There's even a part where the possum's like, yeah, it's hard taking kids. I'm winging it. I don't know, but I do my best, you know, and I'm a mother of like, you know, 7 babies. And then you hear a part where something eats one of the baby possums. You don't see it. And it's like, oh, one mother of 6. And then you realize the possum's still alive. I'm alive, mom. And then the possum mom is like, oh, goody. But kind of in a sarcastic way of like, man, that's like one more mouth I got to keep feeding. But we can all tell it's a joke. You know, this is tough, right? You know, but the robot learns how to try to be a mother towards this goose. And it's not easy. And sometimes in life, there are women who become mothers, and it's not, and sometimes it's by accident. Like with this robot, it was by accident. It happens, and they have to learn to raise this child, sometimes on their own, and it's not easy. This robot doing its best, and eventually the robot gets a name. The name is Roz. Like that's eventually the name that the robot gets. The fox helps the robot Roz raise this goose because it doesn't know what it's doing. In a way, the fox is kind of like playing the robot because it knows that if I stick around this robot, I get what I want, right? But over time, we realize that the fox is just as lonely, just as lonely, and in the end, just wants friendship and companion. And that's like another lesson I saw with this movie, is that sometimes, end of the day, you might deceive people or whatever, but for some people, for them, that's like a mask. At the core of it, they probably just want somebody to be there for them and a friend to them. And so that's like the sideline story with the fox. But back to the Roz trying to become a mother. And eventually over time, she just wants what's best for her baby boy, you know? And eventually the little goose grows up a bit and he tries to integrate with his own kind, but they make fun of him because he's different. And that was another aspect of the movie I saw, was also the idea that like, oh, I was raised differently than I guess my own kind, and I'm shunned for it, and they look at me differently. I am one of them, but they look at me differently because I was raised differently. And I don't know what that parallels to like the real world. I don't know if that's like a metaphor for adoptive children, or like maybe children who have a certain cultural background but they were raised in like a different country, so they weren't raised with their culture, and so people might frown upon them. And you know, like I said, I don't know if DreamWorks was trying to get that deep with it, but that's how my brain like is making these connections and how I can best like relate to these films. But regardless of any of that though, I'm sure most of us have been in a situation where we felt differently. Yeah, we're around maybe our peers who have similar things to us, but we still feel like we don't belong. And sometimes we are ridiculed and made fun of it because we do things differently. We weren't taught the same way. But at the end of the day, Roz just wanted to do best for her son. And she raised them the best she could for what she had. You know, she was practically a single mother, with the fox being like the uncle or something like that. And that's about it. And you can see though that, and this is part where I was like, dang, it's kind of emotional to watch, because she sees that her son is just, he doesn't fit and he's being bullied, and she wants to do everything to protect him. She wants to keep him safe. She wants to see him succeed, but also in a way like she needs to help him, yes, but like she also needs to kind of let him do his own thing. She was being overprotective at some point. It is the mother, but also the goose's name is Bright Bill, so that's we're going to start using more names here. And the fox's name was Fink. So eventually the son learns that Roz was the reason his mother died. But you also learn later on that Bright Bill was basically the runt of his siblings. And so that if most likely in nature, if you are the runt, you don't survive. And the fact that all the events that transpired was the reason that he had a chance of life, because Roz took care of him. When in nature, that doesn't happen. And there's so many times in this movie where we see that, like, yeah, it's a dog-eat-dog world. There were so many times where animals were eating other animals and predator versus prey. It was a brutal movie. But like I said, eventually they come together and Roz is like, I really want to help you. I really want to be there for you and help you learn, because he has to learn how to swim, fly, so he could go south for the winter. He was going to migrate, but he's a runt and he doesn't know properly how to fly or to even really how to swim, because he wasn't raised with his kin, right? Eventually this older goose comes down and it's like, hey, goes to Roz and says like, it's amazing what you've done with him so far. And I think he has potential to fly with us, but you really do need to teach him. So eventually they all come together and through this beautiful montage, he learns how to fly. He gets help from like this, I don't know, it was like an eagle named Thunderbolt or whatever. Yeah, he eventually learns how to fly and he goes south for the winter. And here's one of those parts where it was like the mother saying goodbye to her son, but she had such a hard time telling him that she misses him and that she loves him, most for the reason because she is a robot. But you can tell that she's starting to feel a little bit like she has been rewriting her code to better understand how to finish her task, which is to raise this goose so he can go migrate. But that's when we get into the topic of like maybe robots and AI and like, could they learn to feel, or is it their code? That's a whole other topic, right? But all I can think about when I was watching this movie is like every parent in this world who's like probably watching this with their kid, turning over and like thinking about, man, there's gonna be a day where I'm gonna have to let my child go and it's gonna hurt. And it made me feel emotional to think about, you know, thinking about like family and everything like that. And I was like, dang, this is like kind of sad to watch, you know. Eventually he goes south for the winter, and this is where you kind of see a little bit more of the world. This is like a post-apocalyptic world. Like, I mean, you see like the Golden Gate Bridge is like underwater, whales are going underneath it. I felt like the vibe of the world was a little more like kind of solar punk. Like there was like, especially like the robot like having moss grow on it, and like you see this future dystopian world that's like in a glass bubble. And I think there was even like a mention of the weather is much more drastic, you know, and that probably alludes to a lot of things going on like even right now in our society. But yeah, it was just very interesting. Eventually the geese do fly south and they kind of go into this futuristic bubble, and then eventually Bright Bill actually sees more versions of Roz, and then they get captured. But because he was raised differently, he was able to, all the other geese are like freaked out by the robots, but he isn't, because he was raised with one, you know, he was raised by one. So because he was raised differently and he had this specialty, he was able to know how to navigate better and not like freak out as much. And he led the flock out safely because the robots, they lock onto them and consider them pests. And then this is where we had the tragic sacrifice of the older goose, Longneck. It was actually kind of sad. But over time, we see what happens with Roz. Roz is like, I'm gonna go back home, you know, because my task here is done. And there are many times where she wants to do this. She wants to send her beacon. She even learns at one point that she is like different. She is rewriting code, and that's kind of like, that's not supposed to happen, you know. But over time though, she doesn't want to leave. Like, she can tell that she doesn't want to leave, and she can't fully understand why she doesn't want to leave, because obviously she's a robot, right? But she's been, like I said, she's been rewriting her code, and she's learning how to feel, how to have some compassion towards, you know, her son and these other animals. She started to slowly befriend, you know, and she wants to stay so she can wait for her son to come back during the spring. While you know, Bright Bill is out, you know, doing his migration and has a whole thing with the robots and this futuristic bubble city. Roz stays back, and this is where Fink wants her to stay too, because he's never had a friend, and this is like his first friend ever in his life, and he definitely wants her to stay. But it's winter, the animals are slowly hibernating. There's like this little house they build. This is just a side tangent, but straight up, like when I was watching this, I was like, man, I feel like I was just dropped in the Minecraft world, and you know, having to like find a task to do in my job. And that was another like thing about this movie that it kind of talked about, was the fact that sometimes in society that you're expected to have all these tasks to do, but like maybe that's not what you want to do. Maybe like to use the Minecraft metaphor, maybe the goal is to beat the inner dragon, but what if I don't want to do that? What if I want to build a little house in the middle of the forest and play with the woodland animals? I could do that, and that's exactly what Roz did. And she builds this house, and that's where Bright Bill and Fink live for the most part of it. But during the winter, Fink mentions that it's a brutal winter, and like all the animals are going to be freezing, and so he's kind of neglected to get animals to stay in their little hut. But eventually Roz gets him to help her go find the animals. So there's like a montage of them finding all the animals and bringing them in their little wooden hut. And there's even a part where they even see that like, man, some of the animals didn't even make it, like they froze to death, right? And I was like, it's like I said, this movie's getting dark. And then the final animal they get in there is the bear, which was a bear that you see throughout the movie, who's pretty violent. But like, you have all these animals in this shelter, and they're attacking each other and fighting each other because they're animals, right? And most of them, like, okay, this animal's gonna eat this animal is gonna want to fight this animal. And eventually it's like, at this point, Roz is like beat up, you know, and it's been beat up. Like, I mean, she has like a wooden like leg at this point. She looks like this, you know. And then that's when Fink gives the speech of like, hey, like, you know, you guys have, you know, ridiculed her the whole time she's been here, but she she has done nothing. She has done nothing but help every single one of you as many times as she could. And she's still, even while she's like pretty much beaten down, she's still helping you guys. And like if we're gonna survive this winter, we all need to come together, right? And that's when like the bear like gets up and is like, hey, I won't attack anybody here as long as like we all agree to. And I felt like it was kind of this point it was making about like, yeah, I feel like we all have our differences, you know, and then sometimes in this world we are forced to maybe like I said, a dog eat dog world and try to do everything we can to stay alive. But there are instances where we are all put in the same position, and regardless of our differences, regardless of our status and, you know, how strong or how weak we are, if we don't come together, we're all gonna die. You know, we're all in the same boat in this situation. Sure, maybe yesterday I hate you and tomorrow I might hate you, but today we're all in the same boat. And if we don't stick together, if we don't come together, we're gonna die. Like I said, this movie had so many like, wow, this is a pretty teachable moment. And there was just so many of them. I can't even describe them all. Eventually Roz shuts down and, you know, they rest for the winter. And they all agree to be together. You know, spring comes, Bright Bill's there, and Roz just like wants to tell him how she feels, like I love you, like you're my son, you know, and everything like that. But she sees that like, oh, he's with his own kind now, maybe I should step back, maybe I my motherly duties are over, maybe it's time I let him go. And she's like, I'm gonna go back home, you know, it's time for me to leave. So she does, and that's when a ship comes and tries to take her. But, you know, Fink is like, hey, like, Bright Bill's here. He wants to talk to you. He wants to, like, say hi and everything. And, you know, she's like, really? And then she tries to leave. And then the other robot's like, whoa, well, you can't do that. You can't, that's like going against protocol. You can't do that. And so this whole battle that ensues goes after the robot, like it's practically destroying the forest. But then the forest animals all come together and like, no, we're going to help you fight off these robots. And they do, but the forest catches on fire. And then even after all their efforts, Roz does get captured. And then also they have to go up to the ship to get her. And they want to extract all her memories because she was able to somehow rewrite her code. And that was like the data from that was like really important to this, you know, whatever this corporation of like these robots or whatever. And so, but eventually Bright Bill comes in and tries to save her, but it's too late. Her memory sucked out. It was a very sad moment of like, that's when Bright Bill finally was like, look, I love you, Mom. Like, and I thank you for everything you did, as she lays there, her lifeless robot cold body. And somehow like her chest glows and she comes to life. And that and it's like this thing where she's no longer thinking from where her core, her brain is. She's thinking from her heart. She's feeling from her heart. And she gives herself like sentience or whatever. I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it's like, it was crazy. I was like, huh. I was like, this, like, is this even possible? Does it ever happen? Will we ever get this far in technology? I don't know. So they eventually, they escape, and the animals are happy, but the forest is like practically destroyed. And this is a side note, but there was a beaver in this, like the forest is on fire, right? But there was a beaver that they make fun of him because he's trying to chop down the biggest tree. He's trying to chop down the biggest tree in the forest. And I knew whenever they made fun of that beaver in this scenario, that this was going to come back later. They're going to need this beaver for something. And so they do. Eventually they, hey, we need this beaver to chop down this tree. So it like blocks the water in the river, and it will flood the rest of the valley and take out the water. It was a pretty cool scene, actually. But I was really happy when it happened because like I called it. I called it. But they put out the fire and they're all happy. But Roz is like, I need to leave, and I'm sorry to do this to you. And they're like, but we can't have you leave. Like, we love you here. And then that's when it's like, if I stay here, you guys are in danger. They're going to keep coming after me, and I need to get out of here. And maybe someday I'll come back, and someday I will come back, you know. So she leaves, and it's a very sad moment, but she leaves, and it ends with like she goes back to society where, you know, she is integrated in, you know, is like dealing with crops and people, and, you know, acts pretty fairly normal for a robot. But her son still visits her because he flies, you know, south for the winter, and it's a beautiful moment. And then the movie ends, and there's also an end credit scene of them, the forest animals, like planting a tree to bring the forest back, and then they hit a squirrel with an acorn. It's kind of funny, but it's a beautiful movie. And that's pretty much The Wild Robot. Like, I popped off because like it was such a good movie, but such a great cast too. Like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know who was in this movie. The only person I knew who was gonna be in this movie was Mark Hamill, and throughout the whole movie I was like, who is he voicing? He voices the bear. But like, we had Pedro Pascal, we had Lupita, we had Matt Berry, Catherine O'Hara, like we even had Luther from Mission Impossible and Captain Rex. It was such the ensemble cast of this movie was beautiful, and none of it was even advertised. Oh my gosh, it's a great cast. But the minute I heard Matt Berry's voice, I'm like, that's my man. let's go, father. You know, like that. Oh, I love Matt Berry so much. Oh, he was the beaver. They needed him for the end of the movie to save the forest. Oh, I love Matt Berry. He makes a boot for the robot out of wood. It's so beautiful. Great cast. But like I said, this movie was beautiful. Like there were so many, like I said, different lessons of being different, trying to follow like what society wants you to do and versus what you want to do. The hardships of being like a single mother and just being thrown into that, and then all the pressures that like it comes with that you think, oh, am I good enough to do this? Could I figure it out? And you feel bad, but also like, hey, you're just doing your best. That's all you can do. You're just making up as you go. Like, and even parts about like, you know, forest. But yeah, there was all these lessons that this movie like threw at me all at once, and I was like, I can't handle this. Like I couldn't. You know, the last it was just so it was a good movie. And it was so beautifully animated too. It was like watching this painting come to life. It was very similar to like the kind of the style that like Puss in Boots had, The Last Wish, which also another banger of a movie that DreamWorks made. I mean, I've been saying it for years. When it comes to the quality of movies, animated movies, DreamWorks better than Disney. I'm saying that Disney and Pixar, like, get out of here. DreamWorks I've always been a fan of that. You know, I don't have Blue Sky anymore, so that's unfortunate. But yeah, the Wild Robot. Man, you know, I'll be honest with you, some of the best movies I saw this year were all animated, like Transformers and shoot. In 2 days, I'm gonna see Piece by Piece with Pharrell. Like, let's go. It's gonna be bangers all the way. But people slept on this, in my opinion. I heard nobody talk about this movie. It was such a great movie. Like a robot that learns to love and makes friends with woodland creatures and becomes a single mother with a fox who's her best friend and becomes like an uncle to her goose child. What else is not to love about this movie? All I gotta say, it sells itself. Juice out.